There are a number of new models that are emerging beyond what I just described. What I talked about was the traditional biotech VC model. But let me give you an example of a company that I was involved in that is a bit of a different model. So I wrote a paper a few years ago simulating a portfolio of rare disease therapeutics. Why rare diseases? Mainly because I wanted to illustrate that if you combined a bunch of projects that are statistically low correlation, then you can reduce the risk very quickly, 1 over the square root of n, frankly, and that would actually lead to a very, very attractive portfolio very quickly. And so I published this paper, and then I was able to actually apply some data to this from NCATS, where they have a rare disease portfolio. This is part of the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. And a venture capitalist read the paper that I published with that data and made an appointment to see me and said, this is a really cool idea. Can you try it out with a different set of assumptions? So I reran the model with his assumptions about the probability of success, how much it would cost to go to phase 1, phase 2, and so on. And at the end of 5 or 6 months, this VC came into my office and said, I just want to let you know, I quit my job, and I'm going to start this company. So that really freaked me out because I'd never had that effect on somebody that they would actually quit a job based upon these kinds of simulations. So I felt very guilty and scared, and so I invested in him, a small amount of money, and he got other friends and family. So he started this company to combine a number of rare disease therapeutics. It was a very different business model in the sense that he created a parent company, and the projects, the different therapeutics, were subsidiaries that was underneath that parent company. So it was not a fund. And we approached investors that did not traditionally invest in biotech venture capital. One of the first investors into that company was KKR, a private equity fund. Private equity is very different from venture capital. They don't invest in VC funds. But because we structured the company as a company with subsidiaries, the capital that we received was permanent. There wasn't a 5-year, 7-year horizon. It was part of a private company. And so over the course of the last 3 years, we started the company 3 years ago, the company's raised over $500 million in multiple rounds, staged commitments, and the company is valued today at slightly over $1 billion. It's got about 18 rare disease therapeutics as subsidiaries. 2 of those subsidiaries have done IPOs. That's a very different business model. The investors, who are they? Well, there are private equity firms. We have an insurance company that's an investor. AIG is an investor. A couple of hedge funds are investors. And a couple of biotech VCs ultimately did decide to come in for the ride, but they are not the majority of the money that we've got. So that's a very different business model from the VC structure, but it relied on the fact that it's not just one thing that we're doing, it's a portfolio. It's all rare diseases, but it's a portfolio of them, and it's structured in a way to reduce the risk to investors. That's one example of a business model. Another example is, I mentioned the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. The CF Foundation, their goal, starting in the 1990s, was to create a drug for cystic fibrosis. Up until then, there was no drug that actually dealt with the disease. There were lots of drugs that dealt with symptoms, but nothing that dealt with the actual aspect of CF. And so in the 1990s, the CF Foundation started investing in drug companies. They would approach a biotech company and they would say, you've got a really interesting ion channel mechanism, inhibitor or enhancer. We'd like you to work with us to develop a drug for CF, and we will invest in you. By invest, they meant we'll put money to work and we expect equity in return. Actually, they didn't take equity, they took royalty interests in a drug if it ever got approved. And the beauty of this deal is that a biotech company, when you get money from them, you're looking at the next round. You've got to worry about the next round because you're going to run out of money at some point and you're going to need another infusion of cash. The problem is, how do you know that the investor is going to be there for that next round? Well, the CF Foundation, they couldn't care less about rate of return. They want a drug for CF. So They're going to be there as long as you're there, as long as you, the biotech entrepreneur, are committed to working on a drug, they're going to be there. So they put money in Vertex. Vertex developed their therapies. They had a number of missed milestones. And what a venture capitalist would probably have done is to pull the plug. But the CF Foundation says, no, we understand why you missed the milestone. And as long as you're continuing to invest in it, we will too. Over the course of about 10 years, they invested $150 million in Vertex. Just in Vertex. They did a lot of other companies too. And in 2012, Kalydeco was approved by the FDA. In 2014, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation sold their royalty interests in Vertex for $3.3 billion in cash. $150 million, $3.3 billion. I would say that's a pretty nice IRR. But they weren't focused on that. They wanted to get a drug approved. Vertex benefited because they had an investor that was in it for the long run. For every single milestone where they needed an additional amount of capital, the CF Foundation was there, and they said, yep, sign me up. Here's another 100 million, here's another 20 million, here's another 10 million. So patient advocacy groups are really powerful. Now, the CF Foundation was pretty well endowed. They're even more endowed now, and they need to do something with $3.3 billion. So you know what they're doing with that? Now they're looking for gene therapy. They want to cure the disease once and for all. It's pretty cool. So this is an example where biotech entrepreneurs and scientists, they fund a lot of basic science research. In fact, some of you may be funded by them now. Looking for the patient connection, keeping the patients front and center, that will ultimately help you get to where you want to go. If you want to do cool science, that's great. You should do it. But focusing on the patient will get you the money you need in order to take that cool science and bring it into the clinic. So I think that's two examples, and there are 3 or 4 more. There are a bunch of papers on my website where I describe different business models, drug royalty investment companies, securitization using debt financing. So I'm working on trying to set up a number of these different pools to see whether or not we can actually bring more money into the space. And so far, it's looking like it's succeeding. There's lots of investor appetite as long as you can bring down the risk, and that's what finance tends to be pretty good at.